Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Junior English. We turn now in your hymnals to page 1051 and following. We're going to introduce you to the great American poet Anne Sexton. We're going to be looking at her poem, Courage. Let's start first of all with some dates and some information at the bottom of 1051. Just read with me if you would please. Notice dates, 1928 to 1974. Like her contemporary Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton led a life marked by mental anguish and profound creativity. Born in Newton, Massachusetts, Sexton married at age 19, dabbled in modeling, then gave birth to 2 daughters. Suffering from severe postpartum depression, Sexton was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for the first of many times in her life. She was encouraged by a doctor to pursue an interest in poetry, and in 1957 enrolled in the local poetry workshop. The quality of her work earned Sexton a scholarship to study with Robert Lowell at Boston University, and by 1960 she had published her first collection, To Bedlam and Partway Back. She won a Pulitzer Prize in '67. Like other confessional poets of the time, Sexton's poems gave readers an intimate and sometimes uncomfortable look at the poet's own troubled psyche. Let's turn now to Anne Sexton's poem, Courage. And we're going to study now this poem. We're just going to begin by talking with you through reading the poem at level 1. So all we're asking you to do now is just read the poem, and then at the conclusion of the reading of the poem, we're going to ask if you can summarize this poem on 1053. So let's go to work with it now. Courage by Anne Sexton.
Courage by Anne Sexton. It is in the small things we see it. The child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby, or poor, or fatty, or crazy, and made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage. It was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone, getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow, you gave it a back rub, and then you covered it with a blanket, and after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in the little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with the calendar, and at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out.
Okay, so before we actually work and exegete this poem, just jot down at level 1, what is this poem about? I mean, obviously the title says that it's about courage, but what specifically is this poem about? Can you summarize it at level 1 at all? For example, can we ask this question? In the opening lines of the poem, where do we start? And by the closing lines of the poem, where do we end? Some of you will immediately point out, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. We start with the child's first step, and we end with what? Right, what it's like to be an old fart, what it's like to be old, right? So in other words, we're going to have the history of a life defined through the prism of courage, and what courage is. Of course, here the speaker obviously is going to kind of single out, right, moments commonly experienced by ordinary people, pain that maybe gets inflicted on other people, the courage that's necessary in overcoming challenges, right? We could make the argument that this poem at level 1 says, courage is about everything from the very first step you took to the very last breath that you will take as an old person, or we hope an old person. And then everything that kind of is in between. Let's now work through the poem at level 1. Let's just take the poem in segments, and about each one of those segments, let's ask, what specifically is being referenced? Let's see how we do in regards to the poem itself. It, the antecedent to the pronoun, the very first word of the poem, is of course courage, right? It is in the small things we see it, courage. So let's write that down right away. And Sexton's going to argue that courage is often the little things. It's in the little things where we see courage, not in the big things, the little things. Like what little things? Well, let's list them, shall we? And let's just go through it. If you can list all of these at level 1, you're going to do great on the exam, because obviously you're going to remember all these different little things. Let's go to it. The first one, a child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. Right? I had a junior once that said this. It's really sad I can't remember my first step, because I'm sure it was fascinating for me. You bet it was. And if you spend any time around children who are learning how to walk, one moment they're crawling, the next moment they're pushing themselves up, the next moment they're kind of teetering, and then all of a sudden the very first step where they go and they step, and then they're kind of like, whoa, I did it. Had to have been an amazing moment, like an awesome earthquake. The simile is here. Awesome as an earthquake. Look at the next one. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. Now, of course, we use this word reference in a lecture that I give on learning and learning theory, where you have to overcome fear and pain, when I taught my young son Michael how to ride a bike. This is always a major moment. Learning to ride a bike requires courage. Jot down why. Jot down why at level 1. Why does learning to ride a bike involve courage? I was just recently talking to a high school junior who was learning how to ride a motorcycle. He always wanted to ride a motorcycle, so he started learning how to ride a motorcycle. And he said, learning to ride a motorcycle brought back a lot of the fear that was involved in learning to ride a bike. It's a strange fear, though, for those of you that ride cycles. You know what I'm talking about. It's like an adrenaline rush. It's kind of like exciting but scary all at the same time. You feel very vulnerable on two wheels if you've ever ridden a motorcycle. You know what I'm talking about. Look at the next one. By the way, just point out that verb wallowing up the sidewalk. That's a great verb, isn't it? I mean, you're kind of like, if you're first learning to ride a bike, how do you ride? You're kind of wobbly. You're not real confident. Look at the next one. The first spanking. Whoa, first time maybe that you got disciplined. If you weren't spanked in your house, maybe it was the first time that you got disciplined. When your heart went on a journey all alone. The first time that you had to kind of be punished, and maybe you were really heartbroken by that. We should point out that the first 3 things listed in this poem are things that happened to each of us, but probably hard to remember the first time it happened. Sexton's going to argue, you had to have courage to get through all 3 of those things, but you can't really remember the experience of those 3 things. But the next one, chances are, we're going to see, we're moving out of childhood, and we're moving into a different phase of our life. Let's look at the next one. When they called you crybaby, or poor, or fatty, or crazy, and made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. What's going on here? Jot down what's going on here. Right, this is that moment of bullying, right? When you ended up in school, and people treated you badly, and you felt alone, and you were afraid, and people were mean to you in some way, and you had to drink their acid, you had to put up with it, and just keep going. It took courage to survive. We will ask at 3B here in a little bit, do you think it takes courage to make it through middle school? I've had juniors that say, hardest time of my life, no question. Man, especially 7th and 8th grade. Brutal, brutal time in my life. I had so much I had to deal with, garbage I had to deal with. It was rough. It was really rough to get through it. Walking the halls alone, there were the kids who could be mean and vicious and all of that. She's obviously playing into that game. How about the next one? Later, which gives you a sense that we're talking about beginning, middle, and end. Let's put that in our notes at level 1. A life, beginning, middle, and end. Later, if you face the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. Whoa, what's going on there? What's she talking about? She's talking about a reference here to war, isn't she? If you went to war and you survived it, or you were able somehow to find your courage, it wasn't because of some banner, right? You did it only with a hat to cover your heart. Patriotism, belief, honor, courage. The belief that I can do this, I can get through this. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. In other words, everyone's afraid in a situation like that. But courage is overcoming fear. Your courage, and there, of course, the first time the word gets used other than the title. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. Now, I've had students that say, that is an amazing word picture. Coal is hot. Fire. And if you're going to make it through this life, you're going to have challenges. And the only way you're going to make it through those challenges is to swallow your courage like a small coal. Fire. You've got to have some fire. They even use that term, fire in your gut or fire in your belly. If your buddy saved you, we're still talking about war, aren't we? And died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage, it was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. In other words, you take it for granted. Let's make 2 points here at level 1. We're saying here that out of courage grows love. Love is a product of courage. You got to have courage to have love. And about love, the speaker says, it's as simple as shaving soap, something you take totally for granted. When you put shaving soap, if you're a guy, back in the day, that's the way guys shaved. Still today some, but not as much. But back in the day, you put shaving soap on to shave. You don't think about that. It's just taken for granted. We hit another later, which gives you again the sense that you're going through your life, right? Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone, getting a transfusion from the fire, the coal that you swallowed. Picking the scabs off your heart, it's the first line on 1054. Then wringing it out like a sock. Whoa. Now this is a compelling word picture. It's about the worst imaginable despair, unhappiness, and how you got through it. And her comment here is, notice, that the way you got through it was by continuing to have courage that allowed you to have some kind of transfusion of fire. A lot of my students are disgusted and love the word picture of line 30, picking the scabs off your heart. Probably some have argued that this is a reference to despair caused by a bad relationship gone south. If you have been in a relationship that was awesome and then it wasn't, you know what it means to pick the scabs off your heart and then wring your heart out like a sock. Why wring it out like a sock? Because it's wet. Why is your heart wet? Because you cried. Despair. Sadness. Next. Instead of the word later, it's next. My kinsman. In other words, we've all gone through this together. You powdered your sorrow and gave it a back rub. And then you covered it with a blanket. And after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. In other words, your heart gets broken, but you find a way to get through. And you go on with your life, no matter how terrible the despair or the loss. It can be death, it can be emotional pain of any number of kinds. The last later takes you from middle age now to old age. So you can kind of see the way this poem works, from childhood to middle age to old age. Later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, we think of the earlier poem, Sylvia Plath's poem, Mirror, and the old fish of a face. Your courage will still be shown in the little ways. Back to the first line. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love. And you'll bargain with the calendar. That's a great line. You'll bargain with the calendar. Every spring, you'll look up and you'll go, it's a 3B observation, but I love to make it to juniors. Think about the way, once you turned about 5, you thought of your life in cycles that did not really start with January the 1st. People made a deal of January the 1st. The adults in your life made a deal of January 1st. But let's be fair. Think about this. In your life, your year has always started from about the age of 5 in September to May. That's how you think of time. Think about this. I've said this to juniors. They're like, I never thought about this. It's totally true. You think about the new year starting with the new school year. Right? And then everything about your life is, dude, when do I get to June? When do I get to June? When do I get to June? Because then I finally can get what? A summer off. Whew, nice. Year after year after year. Question. Once you're no longer in school, you will look at the calendar maybe differently. It won't be about September. September will just be another month. Why? Because you got a job. Guess what? You had to go to that job June, July, and August. High school seniors will often say that as they get ready to go to college, it's kind of the continuation of high school all over again. Guess what? You go to college. Guess what? When? September. Guess when you're done? Guess what? It's usually June of the following year. But the minute you graduate from college and you get your first job, as in a career job, you're not in college anymore. It's the weirdest thing to report. The first June, you have to work in your career job, and July, and then August. Now, of course, some students will say, I work all the way through my summer, so I know what that's like. Kinda. It'll be interesting, though, for you when you no longer have to interrupt your year with September and going to school. The calendar, negotiating with the calendar. It's a great word picture. Let's keep going. You bargain with the calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. Now we could jump to 3A really quickly and remember that powerful line about I've seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I've seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short I was afraid. Those are lines from T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. This is an interesting word picture. When death comes, death will come through the back door. Open the door of your house and say, hey, let's go, it's time. And you do what? Fine. And you put on your house slippers. Now, some of us don't know what house slippers are, but back in the day, when you were in the house, you didn't walk in your house with shoes on. You rather walked in the house with your house slippers on. And so the picture here is when it's time to go, you'll have enough courage to be able to be ready to go and stride out. To stride means you walk with confidence. Okay, so that's level 1. Let's jump now to level 2A. What is this poem really about? What do you mean, what's it about? It's about courage. No, I know that. But what is this poem really about? Let's ask some theme messages stuff here. And again, we take the most simple of poems, observations, and we start to challenge ourselves to think at another level. That's the whole point of level 2 and level 3 reading. So let's ask. Number 1, first thing we want to say about a possible message or theme. Courage is something you're not born with. Like the color of your eyes. No. Courage is something you gain from the very beginning. And it grows over time. Very interesting. The first time you took a step, you had to have some courage because, of course, you could fall. The first time you learned to ride a bike, you had to have some courage because you knew you could fall and it would hurt. The first time you fell in love and it broke your heart, you had to find the courage to get through. But the reason you had that courage was because of experiences from before. Another major message which goes along with this one, let's write it down. Your life is a series of challenges that you have to overcome. And you get through them one at a time. Final message. The ultimate challenge is when death opens the back door. We immediately think of the Christmas Carol at 3A, don't we? The Scrooge story. And the last ghost to visit Scrooge is, of course, dressed all in black with the hood, right? Never says anything. Takes Scrooge to his tombstone, points at his tombstone. It's at that moment Scrooge is ready to start begging for just one more second. Why? Because he lived a crummy life. If you live a life of courage, this poem suggests, at your final moment, well, we've said it this way in 303 before, everyone thinks the same words at the moment of death. The words are, oh my God. The question is the inflection of your voice. Most people, like Scrooge, come to the final moment and go, oh my God, what have I done with my life? If I could just undo, I'd go back. Regrets. A lack of courage, we might say. But if you live a life of courage at the moment of your death, you put on your house slippers and you walk out the back door striding confidently and say, yeah, I did it. I did the best I could. It's an interesting idea. Of course, let's go ahead at the rhetorical level and ask, what is for you the most compelling simile here? What is for you the most compelling word picture here? Is it that wobbling on your bike? Is it that taking of the first walk? Some students have said this, picking the scabs off the heart and wringing it out your heart like a sock to hang it up on a clothesline to let it dry out. That is a compelling word picture. And you bet, that is what it feels like when your heart's been really broken and you've really cried. You're really sad. Or some guys will say, I don't cry, but I get really mad and start punching stuff. Whatever it is, your heart is shattered.